Hello everyone, I'm your host Paige, and you're listening to ReverieTrueCrime. Please excuse my voice, I am still getting over the flu and strep throat, but I did want to get this episode out to y'all. Before we jump into today's episode, I have two special announcements to make. In February or March of 2023, I'll be having my first interactive live show on moment.co. You can go to the website moment.co to see all the interactive live shows that are coming up, and you can even watch shows that have happened in the past. I'd love to know which case you'd like for us as a group to discuss. For February or March, we could talk about a case that happened during that month or not. It's completely up to you. You can email me at ReverieTrueCrime@gmail.com or contact me on social media to let me know. In a few months, I will post a poll on social media where you can vote on the most requested cases that you want me to dive into. You'll have a chat on the side, basically like Zoom does, where you can chat with each other. I can see the chat and interact with you, answer any questions, and we can talk about the case for as long as we'd like. You'll also have the option of calling in via a private Zoom line where you can choose to be on screen or audio only, and you can react to the story with me as we go through it. You can also send in pictures of yourselves watching and reacting to the moment so I can see your awesome faces and say hello. You can also send pictures of the people we are discussing, or even just your precious pets that are hanging out with you while you're watching. It's solely up to you. If just sitting in the chat room and typing is your vibe, of course that is absolutely fine. There will be an after party where we will decompress, we'll have some snacks, wine, soda, or water, whatever you prefer, possibly even play a game that is horror related, and you can ask me any questions and we can talk about previous cases that I've covered. It will be a very chill and fun time. Of course, I'll keep you posted as I know more details, but in the meantime, I'd love to get your ideas on what case we should take a deep dive into. I'd love to meet all of you who listen and to be able to thank you for your support. Again, you can visit moment.co to see upcoming shows and previous ones as well. I'll be making ticket prices very affordable to ensure as many of you can attend as possible. Secondly, I'm grateful to be a part of the 2023 True Crime Podcast calendar. There is a pre-sale happening right now for 15% off. On top of that, you'll get an extra $5 off when you use the promo code REVERIE. REVERIE. Just go to podcastcalendars.com and use promo code REVERIE. The promo code still works after the presale has ended. That's podcastcalendars.com, promo code REVERIE. Now let's get started with today's episode about Willowbrook State School in Staten Island, New York.
I visited the State Institution for the Mentally, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth, that many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because of lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower. There's very little future for the children or for those who are in these institutions. Both need a tremendous overhauling. I'm not saying that those who are the attendants there are the ones that run the institution are at fault. I think all of us are at fault. And I think it's just long overdue that something be done about it.
How long have you been at Willowbrook?
18 years.
How long were you given physical therapy in school?
5 years.
Are you still going to school?
No.
Why?
I'm over age.
You're too old?
Yes.
Would you like to go back to school?
Yes, I do.
What would you want to learn if you went back to school?
Learn not my reason more.
Learn how to read?
Right.
How is it living on the ward that you live?
Disgrace.
It's a disgrace?
Yes.
Why?
The conditions are getting worse every time they cut the budget more and more.
But even Bernard, with his tragically eloquent plea for help, doesn't really understand that what Willowbrook needs isn't more money. More money would certainly help. At least the kids would have clothes and they'd be cleaner than they are now, but they'd still basically be human vegetables in a detention camp. What we need is a new approach. We have to change the way we care for our mentally. We ask for change, we demand change. What you've seen here just doesn't have to be this way.
Staten Island is one of the 5 boroughs of New York. One of the neighborhoods in Staten Island is called Willowbrook, and in 1938, on 375 acres of land in Willowbrook, there was a blueprint designed for a building. This building was intended to be a facility for children with intellectual disabilities. In 1942, the building had been fully constructed, but in the beginning it wasn't used as a facility for intellectually disabled children. It was turned into a United States Army hospital called Halloran General Hospital. 5 years later, in October of 1947, the facility for the children, named Willowbrook State School, was opened by the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene. Not long after the children got to the school, there was an outbreak of hepatitis, mainly hepatitis A, an infectious disease of the liver. Studies that were considered very controversial took place involving these children between the late 1950s to the 1970s. Some of these children were given the disease on purpose. One medical researcher who came to the school in an attempt to help was Saul Krugman, whose alma maters were Ohio State University, University of Richmond, Medical College of Virginia, and finally, New York University. Saul was a pediatrician who studied hepatitis, rubella, and measles. The way he achieved the results of his studies, which we will get into because it didn't come to light until much later, were extremely immoral, depraved medical procedures and experiments. Another medical researcher who went to Willowbrook was Robert Wayne McCollum Jr. His alma maters included Baylor University in Texas and Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Robert was an intern at New York Presbyterian Hospital in pathology, going on to intern at Vanderbilt University Hospital in internal medicine, and he finished a residency in internal medicine at Yale New Haven Hospital. Robert became a research assistant in preventative medicine at Yale University. Saul and Robert watched over the children who were infected. They evaluated how, if at all, the medical injections of gamma globulin were working. Their research resulted in a better grasp of how serum hepatitis is different from infectious hepatitis. Serum hepatitis is spread by blood transfusion, while infectious hepatitis, which is more common, spreads by person-to-person contact. Paul A. Offit, a pediatrician who specializes in infectious diseases, described the studies conducted by Saul, saying, quote, "In an effort to control outbreaks of hepatitis, the medical staff at Willowbrook consulted Saul Krugman. He found that hepatitis developed in 90% of children admitted into Willowbrook soon after their arrival. Although it was known that hepatitis was caused by a virus, it wasn't known how hepatitis virus spread, whether it could be prevented, or how many types of viruses caused the disease. Saul Krugman used the children of Willowbrook to answer those questions. One of his studies involved feeding live hepatitis virus from other stool samples to 60 healthy children. He watched as their eyes and skin turned yellow and their livers got bigger. He watched them vomit and refuse to eat. All the children fed this hepatitis virus became ill, some severely. Saul Krugman reasoned that it was justifiable to inoculate intellectually disabled children at Willowbrook with hepatitis virus because most of them would get hepatitis anyway. But by purposefully giving the children hepatitis, Krugman increased that chance to 100%. A 5-year-old intellectually disabled girl named Kathy DeVole had been staying at the facility. At 2 years old, she fell ill with the virus encephalitis, which causes brain inflammation. Kathy was visited by her parents, Arthur and Rita DeVole, on May 15, 1955. When they first laid eyes on their daughter, they spotted welts and bruises. It was also plain as day that little Kathy was physically deteriorating. They quickly pulled their daughter out of Willowbrook State School that very day. An investigation into Willowbrook was on the horizon. Rita and Arthur took their daughter to Buffalo State Hospital, where she was examined that Tuesday by Dr. Leonard C. Lang, the assistant director of the hospital. Dr. Arthur Pence was the state mental hygiene commissioner, and he wrote Governor Harriman telling him about the examination, saying that an initial investigation had not revealed any evidence of neglect or abuse. The investigation was ongoing by Assistant Commissioner Dr. James A. Brussel. In Dr. Lang's report, he noted that the marks and bruises on Kathy's lower back were not from being struck by anything. The report also stated combining the shift from her home to the facility with contracting the measles as well as dysentery, which is an infection in the intestines that causes severe diarrhea that is bloody and or has mucus present, was why she was underweight. The doctor noted that Kathy was still a restless, nervous child who required a lot of care. Dr. Pence's report to the governor said that while Kathy was dealing with her illnesses, she was taking vitamins, receiving extra nourishment, and at one point did have to be fed intravenously. He told the governor that the little girl was given all accepted medical treatments. Dr. Pence went into more details about Kathy DeVole's condition, talking to the Buffalo Evening News, saying, quote, "The child had been very sick. She did lose weight and she needed a lot of care, but she was coming along quite well. I do not wish to underestimate the concern of her family about her, but I can definitely say at this time that there is no evidence of abuse. Children who are run down physically tend to develop skin lesions, which she had. The condition of the hair was apparently due to the acute physical illness which she had, and which sometimes affects it. At one time, the child had diarrhea of the dysentery nature and an attack of measles. She later had a recurrence and was recovering from that. Dr. Brussel also claimed that while Kathy was sick, neither Rita nor Arthur ever came to see their daughter, even though they were supposedly contacted each time Kathy was sick. He also said while Dr. Anthony Barron was conducting an examination on the little girl, assessing her, the DeVoles never made a complaint about Kathy's condition. Dr. Brussels' opinion was that Willowbrook State School was as fine as any in the nation. Dr. Brussel was investigating Willowbrook, and he told Dr. Pence that he would disclose his final report to the governor after a few more days, since, quote, there is much detail to go over. Kathy was removed by her parents from Willowbrook on a Sunday. By Tuesday, Rita said her daughter was eating well and she was doing great. Dr. Lang only spent about 5 minutes with the DeVoles that day as he examined Kathy and told the curious, worried parents nothing. Rita and Arthur were not at all convinced by the conclusions of the doctors that their daughter had not been abused and neglected at Willowbrook. They knew deep inside something happened to their little girl at Willowbrook that wasn't right. The director of Willowbrook, Dr. Harold H. Berman, had told the Buffalo Evening News that Rita and Arthur hesitated before removing their child from the home. Rita fired back, saying, quote, we had not looked at her 2 minutes before we started to make arrangements to take her home. We demanded to see a doctor and find out why Kathy was so thin and had lost her hair. We didn't see Kathy with her clothes off at the home. They examined her with a doctor and 4 nurses clustered around her. My husband and I could not see her closely. We were standing several feet away. All of this sparked a huge conversation about the need for better homes for children who have different needs. Children's Aid and the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children's executive secretary stated, quote, it is a shame that any child has to be sent to an institution so far away from home. It is important for both parents and the child to be in constant contact. If Erie County had an institution of its own, Mr. and Mrs. DeVole would have been able to visit their child regularly. Dr. Harold Berman tried to disprove the charges made by the DeVoles since they had said the school was absolutely filthy. When reporters went to the school, they went through all of the areas of the school, not finding any signs of mistreatment. The main advocate for the school, Dr. William J. Orr, believed due to the seriousness of Kathy's case, not only did that show to everyone that children are in need of these schools, but that it had to be done better. It had to be done correctly. Governor Harriman and the state mental hygiene and health boards had been asked by all board of supervisors to get to the bottom of what was happening inside of the Willowbrook State School, as well as other mental institutions that were under supervision of the state. All supervisors wanted there to be a thorough investigation into these places to ensure the children were being taken care of. Dr. William J. Orr had a great idea. He said, quote, what is needed is a combination type of institution. There should be cottages for educable children, dormitories for the more severely intellectually disabled, and an infirmary for the ill and bedridden cases. The 3 groups should not be mixed. Even the president of the Parents' Council for Children Incorporated agreed that this was the best idea. All these children who had various degrees of emotional, intellectual, and mental issues, who each had specific needs, should absolutely not be grouped together. Thus, there would be better results if they all had their own separate quarters. The president of the Association for the Help of Children chimed in as well, saying that there was a real need for a day school at Willowbrook. A lot of parents supported this so their intellectually disabled children could receive more training resources at a day school than they could offer them at home. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, there was a meeting held where 4 parents who had children in Willowbrook stood by the facility expressing their disapproval and slamming the DeVoles' allegations about their 5-year-old being abused at the institution. Not only were the parents denouncing Rita and Arthur, but so were a Baptist minister, a state senator, and a former judge. They called the charges vicious and unwarranted. At this time, approximately 4,000 intellectually disabled children were residents of Willowbrook, and they wanted to lift up the employees, praise them, and encourage them to keep up the great work that they were doing. An attorney for the civil service employees told them, quote, "All you can do is offer a true explanation and not worry about it." After having his child pass away at the institution, Brett Hartman said the employees of Willowbrook did a miraculous job in helping his child before she died. An assistant professor of psychology and sociology at Wagner College doted on the school, saying she had students doing field work there, and when they were finished with their work, they left Willowbrook so inspired. A Baptist minister declared that an investigation would give the school the cleanest slate of any in the country. One father, Lou Holtz, who was a representative of the Benevolent Society for Children, had a son who had been in Willowbrook since 1949, and that they were all extremely confident in the school. The vice president of the society stated that the employees were doing the job that they as parents were not able to do. Edward V. Curry, the state senator, told Willowbrook employees, quote, "In this case, you need no defense, but if you ever need it, I'll defend you to the last minute." Dr. Harold Berman, the director of Willowbrook, said that Kathy's parents were emotionally disturbed. The next month, June of 1955, Dr. Arthur Pence gave a formal report to the governor saying that Kathy was never abused at the Willowbrook facility. 50 employees were questioned under oath, and there was, according to the doctor, no evidence that Kathy DeVole had been mistreated in any way. Quote, "On the contrary, there are many indications that sincere efforts were made by those caring for her to give her every needed attention, and as one of the employees stated, as much affection as we could to make her happy." The medical records as it stands supplies adequate explanation for all aspects of the DeVole child's condition, including loss of weight, loss of hair, and tendency of skin lesions and abrasions. The element of unpleasant surprise, which played such a large part in the reaction of the parents, was due to the fact that they had not fully grasped the seriousness of her illness, and they did not realize what effects such illness might have. In July, there was an order filed to the Supreme Court that demanded Kathy DeVole's records, including all of her charts, medical history, and any other information there was on Kathy, be sent to attorney Alfred Cohen so he could then forward them over to the Buffalo office of the Department of Mental Hygiene after he reviewed the records. Rita and Arthur were determined to find evidence of neglect while their daughter was at Willowbrook. Attorney Cohen said there was a claim from an official of Willowbrook who said the investigation was done and nothing wrong was found. However, the only investigation that Attorney Cohen knew about was conducted by Willowbrook's own department, absolving the institution of any wrongdoings, and they could not know if that was true or not until they conducted their own investigation. Unfortunately, this is where my research on Kathy DeVole kind of fizzled out. Were Rita an author on a witch hunt, or was this school truly at fault? Whether Kathy DeVole was abused or wasn't, there would be horrendous discoveries years later, and years too late. 1 year later, in the summer of 1956, the school seemed to be getting more positive press as they had been teaching around 40 children in the institution from ages 8 to 14 music classes and had formed a brass band. The music seemed to help a lot of these children immensely. Many children even left Willowbrook to go back to their parents' homes and were said to be adjusting better than ever. In 1957, experiments of therapy went from the subtle teachings of musical instruments to the extreme uses of electroshock therapy, which Dr. Berman and others said caused the children no pain at all. At this time, intellectual disabilities were still not understood, and during autopsies, the brains of children and adults with these disabilities were still being studied. So at the same time of attempting to find what causes these disabilities, there were major experiments done on these children to fix them, and they were basically used as guinea pigs, without their consent, of course, and no consent from the parents. Fast forward 8 years later, September 10th, 1965, and the news was reporting what would only be the tip of the iceberg of the alarming, dreadful discoveries at Willowbrook and other facilities in the area. Senator Kennedy declared that he was shocked and saddened by what he witnessed with his own eyes during his visit at 2 institutions for the intellectually disabled, telling the Joint Legislative Committee, quote, "In the state of New York, in the year 1965, such conditions are intolerable." Kennedy is also the first person you heard speak in the intro. Not only did he go to Willowbrook, but he also visited the state school at Rome, both in the same week. Quote, "There are young children slipping into blankness and lifelong dependence. There are crippled children without adequate medical attention or rehabilitation therapy. There are intellectually disabled children living in the midst of severely disturbed adults. There are children and young adults without education and training programs adequate to prepare them for life in the community. And there are many, far too many, living in filth and dirt, their clothing in rags, in rooms less than comfortable and cheerful than cages in which we put animals in a zoo, without adequate supervision or a bit of affection, condemned to a life without hope." He added that at Willowbrook, the children there had no toys, they never played, they didn't have books or their own clothes. The children were rocking back and forth, grunting, jabbering, and stripping off their tattered clothes. They were injected with huge quantities of tranquilizers to keep them quiet whenever they got too loud, or seemed as if they might be getting restless and aggressive, likely even given tranquilizers when they didn't need it, just to keep them out of it. They were kept in faintly lit rooms that reeked of despair, idleness, disgusting odors, and were glaring at the walls, gazing off into space, only to occasionally glance at an employee or visitors, expressionless. Senator Kennedy also said the children who had severe physical disabilities were in their beds all day, no attempt to give them affection, attention, no attempt at exercise, or sometimes they were just placed in what he called little carts. A lot of the children had no strength whatsoever, and they were emaciated, practically knocking on death's door. If children came there physically doing okay, they were surely becoming physically disabled at Willowbrook. Not only was Willowbrook staggeringly understaffed at the facility, but the physical therapy room was only 6 by 12 feet, and the facility didn't even have one pediatrician working there. There were only 7 recreation workers when Senator Kennedy said there should at least be 50. He believed the children were doing worse inside Willowbrook than they would have been doing at home. In the last year, 5 children had died strange, unnatural deaths at the institution. Senator Kennedy proposed 7 suggestions that could be federally aided. Number 1, augment staffs by use of students taking advantage of federal money to pay them. Number 2, use of volunteers from the community, especially elderly persons under the federally aided foster grandparents program. Use unpaid volunteers who were trained with the help of federal money. Number 4, extend education in the institution's preschool ages under the federal Head Start program. Number 5, intensify in-service training of attendants. Number 6, plan educational programs to use federal funds soon to be available under a new law. And number 7, make use of on-the-job training program of the Federal Labor Department. Additionally, he said there are steps that the state should take on their own, such as having affiliate schools for the intellectually disabled with the state university system of colleges, giving the university students credit for working with these children. To help with the overcrowding, money should be spent buying new equipment and hiring more people. He also called for releasing a Special Investigations Committee's report from the past year to the governor. Again, state officials and others took up an issue with Senator Kennedy's evaluation of Willowbrook State School, as well as the Rome facility. The Mental Hygiene Department and governor knew the problems that the schools faced due to overcrowding and there not being enough staff, which was getting difficult due to the population being on the rise significantly. The state financial plan from 1965 to 1966 would increase the budget by $6 million so they could hire 1,700 staff members. Director of Willowbrook, Dr. Jack Hammond, spoke at a news conference saying Senator Kennedy had made, quote, a distorted, exaggerated, and very destructive attack on the school. Dr. Hammond also claimed that Kennedy spent about an hour and a half walking around the school and picking out a few frames from a series of flash pictures. He had to confess that many things the senator said was true, and as the director, he said he was very much aware of the institution's flaws, which mainly consisted of, allegedly, only overcrowding and understaffing, which they were working on and he said would be resolved. Over the next few years, Willowbrook was getting positive press in the papers and put on a good facade for the public. But let's dig into what they were hiding when photographers and scheduled visitors were not around. Back in 1966, vaccines were being tested on these children for hepatitis. The children were essentially lab rats. Their parents never consented to any of this, and the children obviously could not consent, as we talked about before. According to vaccinologist Maurice Hilleman, quote, The Willowbrook studies were the most unethical medical experiments ever performed on children in the United States. Historian David Rothman notes that, quote, the research was even included in Henry Beecher's 1966 New England Journal of Medicine listing of ethically dubious experiments. Bioethicist Art Kaplan has stated that, quote, the Willowbrook studies were a turning point in how we thought about medical experiments on intellectually disabled children. Children inoculated with hepatitis virus had no chance to benefit from the procedure, only the chance to be harmed. On February 18, 1972, Dr. William Bronston, a psychiatrist who worked with 400 children at Willowbrook, shocked everyone with graphic details of the conditions he witnessed. He said the facility was merely waging a holding action until death, and that the intellectually disabled children were not seen or treated as human beings at all. They were being manhandled like a herd of compliant animals, living a life of misery, despair, loneliness, and horrible stench. Still, the institution promised to fix the issue, promising around-the-clock one-on-one care. This would be around $800 million of the mental hygiene department's budget if all the proper steps were made, which included sending home less severely disturbed children who could live in society and didn't absolutely need to be in the facility. 2 former employees came forward and said they were fired for trying to make conditions at Willowbrook better. One of the former employees described the institution as, quote, state prisons where the inmates have committed no crime other than being intellectually disabled. Willowbrook only had room for 4,000 children, but at this time they were almost housing 6,000, with 77% of those children needing around-the-clock care, and they were not getting it. In 1972, more secrets of Willowbrook were seeping out into the newspapers. 2 female employees took a broomstick and beat 3 young children, ultimately leading to their arrests. This beating was so severe on these little victims, who were possibly 10 years old at the oldest, that the broomstick was broken, covered in blood. During other terrible incidents like this one at Willowbrook, witnesses to these heinous crimes were assaulted, their car windows had been shot out, and they had been threatened to the point they would not testify. Witnesses in this case were watched by a guard 24/7 for their protection. By the early 1980s, Willowbrook had a name change. It was then called the Staten Island Developmental Center. In 1983, 10 employees were arrested for selling drugs at the facility. They weren't selling to children, but their buyers would drive up to the institution and they'd make their trades outside. Some employees were selling heroin, others LSD, and also cocaine. Finally, 5 years later, the state, along with parents of children who stayed at Willowbrook, reached a settlement in a class action lawsuit that would shut down the institution once and for all. It was to be done by the end of the year. This came after Geraldo Rivera did his own investigation in January of 1972 into the Willowbrook facility, and the nightmare he revealed to the world happening inside of that place was unbelievable. Geraldo was given a key from Dr. Michael Wilkins, who had been fired from Willowbrook after he spoke out about the conditions of the facility that needed extreme improvement. At the time, Geraldo was a local reporter for WABC TV News. With his camera and the key to the building, he climbed over the fence of the school and let himself in to what Senator Kennedy had called a snake pit of an institution. As we know, hepatitis, measles, and other diseases were common at Willowbrook, along with the overcrowding and not enough staff to properly care for every patient. Geraldo's footage showed the children barely clothed, some naked, left unattended in complete darkness, and the unsanitary conditions were appalling. Children covered in feces, adult patients and employees were sleeping in chairs and rooms that reeked of disease and death. These children were not separated by their needs at all. For example, you had children with Down syndrome and the same groups with patients who had severe schizophrenia, all of whom were untreated. The awful screams and cries were ongoing throughout Willowbrook. The distressing and heartbreaking sounds I'm going to play for you was the reality of what it sounded like inside of Willowbrook when Geraldo was there. The residents were obviously not showering, they didn't have clothing, and there were no supplies for their hygiene, not even towels or soap. Children were wandering the halls of Willowbrook by themselves, some in a trance-like state. Many children were grouped together in tiny corners, left to sit and stew in their urine, feces, and vomit. Most of them completely nude, since there were hardly any clothes for them. They were not fed very often either. The physical, sexual, emotional, mental, and psychological abuse were out of control and happening daily. A bombshell that really compelled parents and the state to file that class action lawsuit was from a man who used to live at Willowbrook named Bernard Carabello. He spent 18 years in Willowbrook's awful conditions. He had cerebral palsy, unable to speak or move very well, but he was smart as a whip, and he told Geraldo on camera, quote, "I got beaten with sticks and belt buckles. I got my head kicked into the wall by staff. Most of the kids sat in the day room naked. There was a lot of sexual abuse going on from staff to residents." Bernard was the man that you heard speak after Kennedy in the intro of the episode. Speaking of the Geraldo documentary, I transcribed most of it to read to you. Geraldo says, quote, "It's been more than 6 years since Robert Kennedy walked out of one of the wards here at Willowbrook and told newsmen of the horror he'd seen inside. He pleaded then for an overhaul of the system that allowed children to live in a snake pit, but that was way back in 1965, and somehow we'd all forgotten. I first heard of this big place with the pretty-sounding name because of a call I received from a member of the Willowbrook staff, Dr. Michael Wilkins. The doctor told me he'd just been fired because he's been urging parents with children in one of the buildings, building number 6, to organize so they could more effectively demand improved conditions for their children. The doctor invited me to see the conditions he was talking about. So, unannounced and unexpected by the school administration, we toured building number 6. The doctor had warned me that it would be bad. It was horrible. There was one attendant for perhaps 50 severely and profoundly children. Children lying on the floor naked and smeared with their own feces. They were making a pitiful sound, the kind of mournful wail that is impossible for me to forget. This is what it looks like. This is what it sounded like. But how can I tell you about the way it smelled? It smelled of filth, it smelled of disease, and it smelled of death. Geraldo sat by Dr. Michael Wilkins, the former employee who gave him the key to Willowbrook, and said, quote, "We've just seen something that's probably the most horrible thing I've ever seen in my life. Is that typical of ward life?" Dr. Wilkins responded, "Yes, there are 5,300 patients at Willowbrook, which is the largest institution for the mentally in the world. The ones that we saw were the most severely and profoundly. There are thousands there like that, not going to school, sitting on the ward all day, not being talked to by anyone, only 1 or 2 or 3 people to take care of 70 people on the ward, sharing the same toilet, contracting the same diseases. 100% of patients at Willowbrook contract hepatitis within 6 months of being in the institution. Most patients have sometime in their life have had parasites. The incidence of pneumonia is greater than any other group of people that I think exist in this country. Trauma is severe because these patients are left together on a ward. 70 people basically unattended. They're fighting for a small scrap of paper on the floor to play with, fighting for the attention of the attendants who are overworked, trying to clean them, feed them, clothe them, and if possible, pay a little attention to them, and work with them and develop their intelligence. But what in fact happens is that they go downhill. Geraldo says, 2 days after our first unofficial visit, a camera crew was given an authorized tour of the facility. While unannounced, we had found the children naked and basically unattended. The camera crew that had been authorized to take a tour of the facility were shown kids who were fully clothed and generously attended to. It was to ensure that this sudden improvement in the quality of life was permanent that we returned without the knowledge of the school administration and through a back door. It was the first day all over again. The doctor says, for these people, life is just 1 hour after another of kind of looking at the floor, and there's no training going on here. Geraldo asked if the children could be trained. The doctor said yes, every child can be trained. You know, there's no effort. We don't know what these kids are capable of doing. Some training programs go on at Willowbrook, but the state provides the bare minimum, just enough so that they can call this place a school. Clearly, these kids are not getting any training. I mean, I don't think I even have to say that. They're just sitting here on the ward. These are the hours during which they should be in school, and they're not. This is Building 27. These patients do have clothes on today, but as you can see, the one thing that can't be hidden is that there are no training programs. That all these patients do is sit during the day. They're not kept occupied. Their life is just hours and hours of endless nothing to do, no one to talk to, no expectations, just an endless life of misery and filth. What you see, it makes you think that it's hopeless, that they can't be trained. But they only look this way because they haven't ever had an opportunity for training. Now, if you or I were left to sit on a ward surrounded by other mentally people, we would probably begin looking like this too. Geraldo reported, quote, "The Willowbrook State School is the country's largest home for the mentally. It's called a school, but that's more of a statement of aspiration than a fact. Fewer than 20% of the 5,230 people who are kept here attend any kind of classes. When the state of New York entered a period of economic retrenchment 2 years ago, a hiring freeze was clamped on this and other institutions in the Department of Mental Hygiene. In the intervening months, Willowbrook lost 600 employees through attrition. For the budget for fiscal 1971 to 1972, the governor recommended a hold-the-line appropriation of $630 million for the mental hygiene department. The legislators seeking to trim the waste and fat from the budget cut it down to about $600 million. Then the governor decided that even $600 million was too much and cut it even further, all the way down to $580 million. Willowbrook lost another 200 employees, and a situation that 2 years ago was bad became hopeless. The attendants tried to care for their wards, but they were simply overwhelmed. The attendant-to-patient ratio, which should be about 4 children to 1 attendant, dropped to 30 or 40 children to 1 attendant, and the average feeding time per patient, which should be 20 to 30 minutes, went down to 2 or 3 minutes. Dr. Wilkins stated, quote, "Many of the profoundly children are not capable of feeding themselves. In my building, we had no staff to train them in a systematic way to use utensils to feed themselves. That can be done, but what's necessary is to feed them. You take a bowl of food that you've made into a mush-like substance with a big spoon and you ladle it out into their mouth. The buildings where the kids cannot feed themselves, there are so few attendants that there's only an average of 3 minutes per child per feeding." Geraldo asked Dr. Wilkins how much time would actually be needed to do that job adequately. Dr. Wilkins responded that it would take the same amount of time that your children and my children would want to have to eat breakfast. Geraldo asked him what the consequences were of 3 minutes per meal per child. "The consequence is death from pneumonia," Dr. Wilkinson answered. Geraldo also went north of the city towards Bear Mountain. He said it was a lovely-looking place called Letchworth Village Rehabilitation Center in Rockland County. He described it as looking like a country club or college campus. Letchworth was another facility nearby that housed and was supposed to care for physically and mentally disabled people of all ages. Geraldo said, quote, "The early morning mist gave the place an eerie feeling, like a set from a horror movie, and once inside, that feeling became suddenly appropriate." Congressman Mario Biaggi had planned an official tour of the facility for 10 o'clock in the morning, but by this time, wary of what I felt were attempts on the part of the Department of Mental Hygiene to make the situation look better than it really was, my camera crew and I got there 2 hours before that. As the hour of the official tour approached, bundles of clothing were brought in for the children. The process of cleaning up had begun. Even so, none of these cosmetic changes could do much to improve the place. The congressman asked who was in charge there, and he was directed to a woman named Mrs. Nixon. He asked her why the children were not clothed. She told him they didn't have enough clothes or proper help to keep their clothes on them, mentioning there were a few nudists that refused to be clothed at all and constantly stripped themselves. Most of all, she said, they didn't have the assistance they needed to help keep the patients properly dressed. The congressman asked if she was talking about more funding for the institution, to which she replied, "Well, that we could use because then we would have more help." He asked her how understaffed they were, and she said they were very understaffed to the point that every 100 patients only had 4 or 5 attendants. Letchworth was described by the congressman as beautiful on the outside, but the inside, he said, it housed children who were subjected to what seemed to be the worst possible conditions he had ever seen in his life. Quote, "I've visited penal institutions all over the country. I've visited hospitals all over the country. I've visited the worst brigs in the military. Nothing like this. I've never seen anything like it." Geraldo reported that about 25% of the funding for Letchworth Village came from the federal government, and one of the requirements for the continued eligibility is that there was to be 80 square feet of space per patient. At Letchworth, they only had 35 square feet. In the face of terrible overcrowding, there was a ward there that stood empty because they did not have the money to hire the 38 people it would take to staff it. Geraldo went on to talk about another disturbing side of life at Letchworth. More than 300 able-bodied patients, both physically and mentally able to work outside of the institution, were not being allowed to. They were being used as employees due to understaffing. Patients were getting paid $2 a week for their hard work. They could have been making at least $2 an hour outside of the institution. There was another development on the day Geraldo and his crew visited Letchworth 8 days after their investigation had begun. Governor Rockefeller, during the increasing uproar of the public over the horrible conditions at Willowbrook, made an announcement. He was restoring the $20 million he had taken away from the budget of the Department of Mental Hygiene. It was said that Willowbrook would be able to rehire 300 of the 900 employees it had lost since November 1970. Letchworth Village would be able to rehire about 200 additional employees. Still, that would not be able to change the basic nature of the two places that were merely depositories for the intellectually disabled. I will have links in the show notes to 2 documentaries made by Geraldo about Willowbrook, but I do want to warn you, the footage is quite disturbing. On top of all of this, one man, Andre Rochon, was working as a janitor at Willowbrook in 1966 to 68, claiming his last name was Bruchette. Later, Andre would be taken down for kidnapping and murdering local disabled little children. We may have to dive into an episode about him very soon. I'm not sure that he ever kidnapped and or murdered anyone at the facility, but we will surely dig more into that case very soon. The residents of Willowbrook suffered more abuse in the new facilities that they were placed in after Willowbrook shut down. In 2019, in less than a handful of facilities they were placed in, there were 97 reported cases of physical abuse, 34 claims of psychological abuse, and hundreds upon hundreds of reports concerning other forms of mistreatment. The mother of a son who once lived at Willowbrook, who had since passed away, stated, quote, "Now we have small Willowbrooks. As much as things have changed, they don't change." Unfortunately, as we know, conditions of nursing homes, facilities for intellectually disabled people, and institutions for any type of disabled person in general, there is still abuse going on in those places today, right this second. For example, a week or two ago, on Twitter, a lady posted video footage of 2 nursing home employees dragging her elderly father across the floor, beating him with their fist, throwing him onto the bed, folding his body in ways that could have broken his bones. They shut the curtains and spent 20 more minutes beating his face until it was black and blue. Where is the compassion in these places? Where is the genuine care? If this is not the job for these people, why do they do it? What if that was their loved one getting treated that way? This abuse on patients has to stop. Do you think that there is a way to fix this? Will this travesty of abuse that often leads to death in these places where we want to trust people to take care of our loved ones ever not exist? I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this issue. You can reach out to me on Twitter at ReverieCrimePod, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at ReverieTrueCrime, or you can email me at ReverieTrueCrime@gmail.com. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me as I am still battling this strep throat and the flu. I know I sound worse than usual, so I appreciate you guys listening. And before I go, I want to thank the Patreon members at patreon.com/ReverieTrueCrime. Thank you so much to Rachel, Steve, Stephanie, Rob, Dooley, Justin, Angel, TZ, Darling Jade, Badcast Company, Matt, Chelsea, and Lorraine. Thank you so much for supporting over on the Patreon. Thank all of you for listening to this episode. I hope to see you in February or March for the live show. And be sure to pick up your true crime podcast calendar at podcastcalendars.com. Use the promo code Reverie for some extra coins off. And until next time, everyone, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and take care of yourselves and your loved ones.